Story 1. I often hear people confuse weary and wary. I have even heard this in audiobooks, which should be checked for errors. Story 2. For all intents and purposes. Story 3. I don't know if this is true outside of Australia, but many people here say run amok instead of run amok. Also, many say chomping at the bit instead of champing at the bit. Story 4. Nip it in the bud is the correct phrase, not nip it in the butt. Story 5. I cringe every time I hear someone pronounce espresso as espresso. Story 6. Every day I see people using an apostrophe to indicate plurality with numbers and acronyms. Apostrophes are never used to indicate plurality. They indicate possession or contractions. It is intravenous lines, not intravenous lines. The contraction of it is its. Intravenous lines is the plural form, not intravenous lines, which is possessive. Example. The intravenous lines in my arms hurt. The intravenous lines tubing is tangled. Or, if it is the tubing for more than one line, write the intravenous lines tubing is tangled. To indicate a decade, write the 1970s or the 70s because the apostrophe represents the two missing numbers in the phrase, just as it represents missing letters in a contraction. Do not write the 70s because that indicates the possessive of the 70. Story 7. Lately, people have been saying all of a sudden instead of all of a sudden. Story 8. Using a Segway, a brand of motorized personal transporters, instead of a Segway. Story 9. Point of view means that, in the case of photos and videos, something is shown from a first-person perspective. Rule of thumb. If you appear in the video is not from your point of view. The point of view is observing you, which is a third-person perspective. Story 10. Using then when they mean then. I'd rather walk to work than drive. Story 11. Gaslight. Someone lying to you about what happened is not gaslighting. It is just lying. Even if they are trying to convince you that you are imagining it or remembering it incorrectly, it is still not gaslighting. Story 12. Beg the question refers to the logical fallacy in which the conclusion is assumed in the premise. Modern usage mostly treats it as prompts the question or demands the question be asked. Story 13. The phrase one bad apple is now taken to mean that it is acceptable to have a bad apple because it is the only one. The original meaning is the opposite. It is not acceptable to have one bad apple because it spoils the bunch. Another mistake I see multiple times a day is writing a lot as a single word. The correct form is two words, a lot. Story 14. People often say they are nauseous when they actually mean nauseated. Nauseous describes something that causes nausea, that is a roller coaster or a choppy sea. Nauseated describes the state of feeling queasy. However, I understand that language evolves and people accept the intended meaning when the word is used incorrectly, so I do not usually correct others. Story 15. When people say jealous, 90% of the time they actually mean envious. Story 16. Acronym means pronounceable initials such as Self-Contained Underwater Breathing Apparatus and National Aeronautics and Space Administration. Initialism means capitalized initials that are not pronounced such as Central Intelligence Agency and Federal Bureau of Investigation. Abbreviation means a shortened form such as apartment, boulevard, and street. The word acronym is often used to mean initialism, and that drives me crazy. Story 17. Saying conversate instead of converse is, to me, the linguistic equivalent of nails on a chalkboard. It is used so much that I think the battle is lost. Story 18. A trauma bond is not with someone you endured trauma alongside. It is with the person who caused the trauma. Story 19. A few days ago someone typed that she literally ripped her heart out and put it in his hand. That seemed extreme. She appears to have recovered enough to post on Reddit. Story 20. Every day means common. Every day means with daily frequency. Story 21. Flout and flaunt. You flout the rules. You flaunt your wealth. Also, technically, the original poster's question should have used incorrectly rather than wrong. Adverbs are a thing. However, these days, wrong might be correct. Still hurts my ears. Story 22. Both are from Latin. That is comes from Latin id est and means in other words to denote a direct replacement. He is a senator that is an elected official, so his opinion on the matter is suspect. For example, comes from Latin exempli gratia, and is used to give examples and is not limiting or exhaustive. Anyone buying a Japanese vehicle, for example, a Toyota or Honda, will pay more in tariffs. There are other Japanese vehicles, but those are examples. Story 23. Further, I don't even bother anymore. It's used wrongly more often than correctly. Maybe language is changing. Story 24. I often hear people say yay or nay when they mean yeah or nay. I also often hear people use yeah or yeah when they mean yeah. Story 25. I often hear people mispronounce ogle as ogle and use peruse to mean a cursory glance instead of a thorough examination. I used to make the same mistakes. Story 26. The phrase all of the sudden is incorrect. Some people use it instead of all of a sudden. Story 27. Journalists use the word refute, which means prove something wrong, when they actually mean deny. Story 28. Discrete versus discrete. I have heard that on some websites and apps people who seek discrete meetings spell it discrete, which has a completely different meaning. Story 29. Everyone uses literally incorrectly, and you think you are using words correctly but fail every time. Story 30. Using verse instead of versus in athletic competition. People will say, watch National Football League football tonight. It's the Eagles versus the Raiders. Story 31. There are so many people here. If you are describing something that can have a quantity, please use many. For example, there are 500 people here. Please do not use a lot or a lotta when writing. Story 32. Begging the question. Now it also means raising a question because people used it incorrectly for so long. Originally it referred to circular reasoning. For example, how do we know God wrote the Bible? Easy, because it says so in the Bible and we know that must be true because God wrote it. But that's just begging the question. Story 33. People think mortified means terrified. It actually means embarrassed. It is a major pet peeve of mine. Story 34. People often confuse jealousy and envy. Jealousy is the fear of losing something to someone else. Envy is wanting something you do not have. If someone goes on a trip to Hawaii and you say, I am so jealous, that is actually envy. Story 35. Many people use the terms first world and third world to describe a country's level of development. However, these terms originated during the Cold War. First world referred to countries aligned with the United States. Second world referred to countries aligned with the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. And third world referred to non-aligned countries. Many of the non-aligned countries were poor and located in Africa, Latin America, and Southeast Asia, so third world became associated with poverty and underdevelopment. More accurate and widely accepted terms are developed nations and developing nations. Story 36. Bemused does not mean to be wryly amused. Peruse does not mean to skim. For example, it does not mean to skim a document. It means to read it carefully. Fulsome is ambiguous and should not be used as a synonym for thorough. Story 37. Begging the question is a term in logic for a circular argument in which the conclusion is already assumed in the premises. Nowadays, people use it to mean that a question arises from someone's actions. Right example, God exists because it says so in the Bible and God wrote the Bible. You have already assumed God exists, so this is a circular argument and it begs the question. Wrong example, Kash Patel says Epstein never trafficked anyone. Using begs the question to mean raises the question is a modern usage but not the original meaning. Story 38. If you follow any sport closely, you will see this often in the off-season. Journalists and fans frequently confuse the words resigned and re-signed, which is annoying when discussing whether a player is signing with a team or retiring from the sport or leaving a team. Those two words should not be used interchangeably. Story 39. I've seen so many people spell plural nouns that end with Y by just adding an S. For example, babies instead of babies. Sometimes they even add an apostrophe, writing babies. Story 40. The past tense of hanging something up like a painting is hung. The past tense of to hang in the sense of dying by suicide is hanged, as in he hanged himself, not he hung himself. Of course, that cannot be corrected in the moment because the news is so heavy. Story 41. The phrasing "then" with a pronoun is often used incorrectly. I hit more baseballs than him means I hit baseballs more than I hit him. It should be "than he." She loves chocolate more than me means she loves chocolate more than she loves me. It should be "than I." Story 42. Forte is often pronounced as forte in Italian, but it actually comes from French and is correctly pronounced fort. Story 43. Effect and effect. As long as you're effective with your effect, it's usually not an issue. Story 44. Use by accident instead of on accident. This drives me nuts. Story 45. I'm not sure it counts because I don't think it's a word, but my former supervisor, who is a great man, used to say supposedly instead of supposedly, and it drove me insane. Story 46. I get irrationally angry when anyone says, "for all intents and purposes." Story 47. In sports, people often use the word "by" incorrectly to mean a week off. If a team is not playing this week, that is not a bye. A bye is when a team automatically advances to the next round of a tournament. For example, when top teams receive a first-round bye in the playoffs. Because many people misuse the term, dictionaries may eventually add the alternate meaning of a break. Story 48. Begs the question. I studied philosophy and it is a type of fallacy. It means that you assume the truth of the conclusion in the question. Honestly, it is still a terrible name for the fallacy, but the current idiomatic usage just does not make any sense either. Story 49. People constantly type "no one" as one word, and it drives me nuts. Story 50. A factoid is something that sounds true but is not a tidbit of information. Story 51. Paid versus paid. Paid is the past tense of to pay. Paid is a nautical term meaning the tarring of a ship's hull to prevent leaks. Smelled versus smelt. Smelled is the past tense of to smell. Smelt means to extract metal from or by heating. Story 52. These are they. I learned that from the Venture Brothers. Story 53. One I have seen recently is toothsome. It means delicious looking, but I have noticed several cooking shows use it to mean al dente. Story 54. Using myself in place of I is incorrect. It does not make you sound smarter. For example, do not write "John and myself attended the meeting." Do not combine separate words into one, as in high school and best friend. Do not mix up the words sale and sell. I see this on Facebook all the time, and it drives me crazy. Story 55. Using myself in place of me or I. I hurt myself, yes. Give it to Jim, Judy, and me. No. Story 56. Toe the line means to stand right next to it. Story 57. Please bear with me. I don't want to get naked right now. Story 58. That begs the question. I'm too tired to explain. Go look it up. 99% of people use it incorrectly. Story 59. Could have, should have, would have. Story 60. Saying me and X instead of X and I when they are the subjects of the clause. I intentionally rarely use X and I as the subject because it sounds awkward or pretentious to me. I will not correct someone on it except as a joke. It seems pointless because it is so common. Bonus example. Hypercorrecting a correct use of me and X as an object to X and I will likely get called out. Story 61. Do you mind? Sure. When actually you do not mind and are willing to do the thing. Story 62. I might be the only person who cares, but I hate when people say they are nauseous to mean feeling sick. The correct word is nauseated. Story 63. Why has casted become a thing? I see it online constantly, like I don't think he was casted for his intelligence instead of I don't think he was cast. I don't like it. Story 64. Affect versus effect drives me nuts, but I do not correct people when they use them incorrectly. Story 65. Data is the plural form of datum. For example, you would say there are no data to support this. It would technically be incorrect to say there is no data to support this. At this point, however, the misunderstanding is so entrenched and pervasive that it is arguably acceptable to use data as a singular noun. Story 66. A water heater heats water. Why heat water? Story 67. Using mortified to mean frightened or horrified rather than embarrassed or ashamed. Story 68. The word lose is not spelled loose. Correct examples. Mary was trying to lose weight. Since she lost weight, her dress was too loose on her. It used to be too tight, but now it is too loose. Story 69. Bear with me. No, sir, I do not wish to disrobe with you. Story 70. People say, I could care less, when they really mean, I couldn't care less. Story 71. Wet cement is concrete. Cement is an ingredient in concrete. You do not call bread flour. Story 72. Him and I or her and I. It's him and me or he and I. You don't jumble the two. Story 73. Prepare for 1,000 comments correcting the same things that get upvoted because they are the only ones people care about. Story 74. Begs the question is used to mean something similar to raises the question so commonly that I feel a slight internal buzz when I see or hear it used correctly. Story 75. Point of view means a first-person perspective. A point of view video should show the subject's own perspective, not another person's. Story 76. People use the phrase begging the question to mean raising the question, which is incorrect. Story 77. Disingenuous does not mean dishonest. Nonplussed does not mean unbothered. Story 78. Most of the time people use the word wireless when they mean internet access for their phones or other devices. People ask me for wireless cables far too often. Story 79. Ignorant. Most people think it is a synonym for offensive, but it is not. It means there is some knowledge you are lacking. It is a pet peeve of mine when someone says something racist or homophobic and another person responds, "That's so ignorant." No, it is not. It is annoying because ignorant is a useful word that has no good substitute and is losing its meaning because people are misusing it. You do not need another word that means offensive just to feel smart when you use it. Story 80. The phrase "it begs the question" is used to indicate that something brings a question to mind. Story 81. Begging the question is a specific logical fallacy. It does not mean that it raises a question. Story 82. I hear it's a moot point way too often. Story 83. People often say someone and I, but sometimes it should be someone and me. Remove the other person's name. If it makes sense, it is correct. If it does not, it is wrong. Someone and I went shopping. Correct. Someone and me went shopping. Wrong. These games belong to someone and I. Wrong. These games belong to someone and me. Correct. Most people get it right when someone and I is the subject of the sentence but overcorrect and get it wrong when it is the object. Story 84. I came here hoping to see the use of the phrase begs the question. Most people use it to mean it prompts a question, but in reality it refers to circular reasoning, using the conclusion as part of the argument instead of proving it. Story 85. I'm sorry. People say it when there is absolutely nothing they are at fault for. Story 86. People often use the word decimated to describe an area after a hurricane or wildfire. The word comes from a Roman practice of removing 1 in 10 soldiers to punish or cull the weak. For example, out of 100 soldiers, 10 would be removed. If I recall correctly, they would fight or compete to determine the least valuable soldier and either execute or expel that person. I do not know the exact specifics. Story 87. Heaven has no rage like love to hatred turned, nor hell a fury like a woman scorned. It is from a play by William Congreve called The Morning Bride and is over 300 years old. Story 88. You can lead a horse to water, but you can't teach it to fish. Story 89. Nonplussed. Most people use it to mean unimpressed. It actually means confused. Story 90. Many people use absolutes these days. Story 91. These days the word literally is often used in a way that means the opposite of its original meaning. Story 92. Breakfast comprised several things. Saying breakfast was composed of several things is also acceptable, but you should not use was comprised of. Comprise comes from the same root as compress and originally meant to press together. Story 93. Temperature, 3 syllables. Temperature, 4 syllables. What's worse is every television meteorologist says it wrong. Gah. Story 94. Calling a lectern a podium is so common that an online dictionary now lists lectern as a synonym of podium. Story 95. It drives me nuts when an educated friend writes that John Doe passed away. Story 96. Fascism. Most people are clueless about what it is, but have been told that if someone speaks logically, labeling them fascist will supposedly win the argument. Story 97. It can be on purpose or by accident. It is never on accident. Story 98. I could care less. Oh, could you? So you care a little bit, then? Story 99. If you cannot answer someone's question, look up who the Nazis are before using the term. Story 100. Literally is often used when it is not actually literal. Story 101. Phase and phase. Couldn't care less. The phrase I could care less is primarily used in the United States. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.